Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server, $2.99 per month. You can bypass the $1 Apple upcharge if you click on the link in the description here. So again, check out the most information and conversation on the Heat. We call it the most Heat anywhere. It's Off the Floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, including Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down $5. You get $50 to play right away. Prize Picks are our official daily fantasy partner. Of course, the big game on Sunday, if you're listening to this before that, we've got a promotion. If you subscribe to Prize Picks using the code 5 and to Big Picks Energy, that's another of our partners, Big Picks Energy, they tell you who to play. Subscribe there with the code 5. Then if you have the best card for Sunday's game, we're giving you an additional $59 in Prize Picks promo fund. You shouldn't have to ask us why we're making it $59, but it's Prize Picks. Use the code 5. And now our very short intro, since our guy Mercy is still working on a new song. All right, we managed to keep that one under the salary tax, the salary cap, and under the tax. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. I'm producing today, so that's why this is a total disaster. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at 5 Reasons Sports. We got our guy Digital Adel. You can follow him at Digital Adel. Of course, you know from Hoops Profile. He's also part of our group on Playback and also on the NBA on 5 Reasons feed. So make sure you check that out. Also, Brian Fonseca and I have been posting stuff on there pretty regularly. So that's a separate podcast feed. That's around the NBA. We've got Celtics content on there. I know you guys are all going to scramble for that. We've also got Matt Hanifan. You can follow him at MPH, like miles per hour, _824 _. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to hope traffic the 2025 draft, because the Miami Heat now have a chance to get in that draft. Now, that was a question, and maybe I'll start here with you, Adel. The Heat's draft pick situation, what it was, and after the Jimmy Butler trade, how it's changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Miami Heat, the only way they would have had a pick in the 2025 NBA draft was if they would miss the play-in, miss the playoffs, and then they would have been, they would have kept their pick. It would not have conveyed. But now, since the Miami Heat, well, they also traded away a second-round pick for future years, but specifically for the 2025 draft, they got back Golden State's 2025 NBA draft pick that is lottery or top 10 protected. That's different than lottery protected. So as long as it's not pick 1 through 10, Cooper flag through 10, the Miami Heat can get that pick. So anywhere 11 and after, we are golden and good to get one of these prime assets in this very, very deep draft.
And just to follow on that here, we've talked about a lot of drafts being deep drafts. I actually remember the draft that Andrew Wiggins, who they just acquired, that was supposed to be the deepest draft, or one of the deepest drafts in recent years, and it did not really turn out that way. If you look at that particular draft, it didn't pay off the way that it was expected to. Whereas, like, you look at last year's draft, which I know you thought was better than a lot of people believed it to be, and it is proven so. It looks like there are some decent players that have come out of there, including the player that the Heat took at number 15 overall, Kel'el Ware, but also others. Dalton Connect's been traded already, but he got off to a good start. Jarrett McCain got off to a good start. Your guy Messi in
Stephon Castle,
New Orleans. Stephon Castle, who has been good enough that San Antonio did not want to deal him and still brought in De'Aaron Fox. So there appear to be good players coming out of the draft. It takes 2 to 3 years to really evaluate where a draft is, but we don't always know. But this draft, though, has the makings of an excellent one in the sense of there are a lot of players who could be lottery picks, who could be available into sort of the 20 range. And as you're talking about, the Heat are in this weird position with Golden State right now, because I would think that it would benefit them for the Warriors to struggle, but not that much. Is that right? How do you kind of split the difference here?
So as long as the Warriors, so for Miami Heat purposes, it would be better if the Warriors make the play-in and then get into the playoffs that way, or just outright are very good. But if the Warriors, for whatever reason, bottom out and they get more ping pong balls and somehow win the lottery and end up in that 1 through 10 spot, the Miami Heat don't get the pick. The same thing for the following year. If it's 1 through 10, they don't get the pick. But in 2027, it would convey as an unprotected pick if it did get that far.
Okay. So again, it's when you're talking about should you root for Jimmy Butler or not, it's like yes to a point, right? Like yeah, yes, so that the pick conveys, but not so much that the pick is lower than you want it to be. Although with the success rate that the Heat have had lately, they've tended to take players who should have gone several slots higher. And I know people are going to mention the Precious draft. He went about where he should have gone, but of course Maxey went right after him. But other than that, you go back to 2017 and on. Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Jaime Jaquez, and Nikola Jovic and Kel'el Ware, all players that you can say certainly Hero and Bam. There's no question about it at this stage. Should have gone higher than they went. All right, so Matt, let's before we start to get into some of the specific players here. As you look at the Heat roster right now, and I've always encouraged going for best player available, not for need, because your best player, your need always changes as you go forward. There were those, Dan Lebatard, who argued, my friend, who argued against taking Dwayne Wade in 2003 because the team already had Eddie Jones. I wrote a column that night, which was the opposite of that. So that's one of the few columns that I actually have kept in my life because it's one of the few times that I've been right. If you looked at what the Heat need right now, before we get into whether or not that's what they should do, what is the clearest need with the current roster?
I would probably say backup big, and it's kind of funny because we had this same conversation last year with like, okay, yeah, you need a backup big behind Bam Adebayo, and now with Ware's emergence, Kevin Love is just a shell of himself at this stage of his career, and so I would probably say like you need a backup big because outside of Love, it's like, are you going to play Jovic at the 5? I don't think that's necessarily something that you want to do. And something that Spoelstra wants to do. Like you can stagger the Bam Ware minutes, sure, but I don't know if the results for that, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I don't think the results for that have been particularly fruitful this year specifically. And so that's the route. Like that would be like, if you're looking at a positional need, that would be something that, I would target. But then you could also say like point guard. I know Terry Rozier, his contract next year is like 95% of the way guaranteed. And so he's on an expiring if they want to flip him. I mean, I'm sure Heat fans everywhere want to flip him in his $25 million salary. You just have to find a taker for that. You could obviously go that route. There's a lot of wings that they can consolidate, whether it's on draft night or whether it's at some point next offseason. Like I know the Kyle Anderson $9 million. I know they almost got off that at the deadline. Haywood Highsmith will be on an expiring contract. Duncan Robinson still has his near $20 million early termination option that I'm not sure how that works. That's more of a question for Brian Goings of Miami Heat beat. But that's still something that they have to figure out. Wiggins obviously makes $20 million. I don't anticipate they try to trade him, but if there's a bigger trade with a bigger name player, i.e. like a Kevin Durant-like player, that he'd be a player whose salary would fit. And so if you're just looking at positional needs, those are like some areas where they could explore. And then like, if you're just looking for scheme needs, like obviously point of attack defense is something that we've hammered at before. Obviously they get Wiggins, they get Davion Mitchell, who's going to be a restricted free agent this offseason. Like they help that to an extent, but like, are you going to bring back Davion Mitchell? Are you going to bring back Drew Smith? Are you going to bring back some of these guys that help you out in that area? So if you're looking just for like a scheme, like need, that's something that you would probably want to target at some point in the draft or in free agency this upcoming year. So those are just a few different options. They still have 13 players on contract. We still really don't know. Like we'll figure it out over the next 32 games, where players kind of stand in the rotation heading into next season, if they're still on the roster. And so those are just a couple routes that they could go.
So with that in mind, Adel, as you look at what may be available coming up in this draft, assuming that this pick, if let's say we're talking about the Golden State pick, not the Heat pick, although they could have 2 picks in this draft, which, well, that would be something. And then, I mean, they've never had that in the Riley era, right? I don't believe they've ever had 2 first-round picks in the Riley era. They did prior to him in some of those drafts, but I don't believe they ever have with him. And then, of course, that creates a possibility of trading one of those picks because they do come with salary slots, or also, or selling one of those picks if that's really what you wanted to do, or also packaging those picks to try to move up, which is also something that the Heat have never done in the first round. They've done it in the second round. They did it for KZ Okpala. That didn't go so well, and some others, but they've never done that actually in the first round where they've traded up. They have tried one time famously. They tried to get up and get Lamar Odom and use PJ Brown as bait. I think they did the same thing to try to get Darius Miles in another year. Lamar would have worked out better than Darius, and ultimately Lamar ended up playing for the Heat. Darius just ended up playing in Zoe Summer Groove. But they could end up in a situation where they could try to package to move up. But talking about what Matt's talking about there, if we're talking about getting a playmaking a guard, okay, essentially, if you're looking at, again, Mitchell is a restricted free agent. They just acquired, and Rozier is someone who I think they would like to move if they could, okay, and use his expiring in some way. What do you think would be on the board kind of in that 10 to 20 range? Would there be guards you think that would be attractive to them?
There's going to be plenty of guards, but what's really bizarre about this draft, as good as these guards are, they don't shoot the three ball very well, which is kind of opposite of today's NBA. But they have good size, like Jeremiah Fears from Oklahoma. He's 6'4", 182 pounds, quick as a hiccup. He can facilitate a little bit. But the problem with him is physicality is just proving over and over again when he plays in conference play that he's having trouble against physicality. And that doesn't really fit the Heat culture. He's got room to put muscle on his frame. He's only going to be 18 years old on draft night. Nolan Traore from France, he's 6'3", 175 pounds, also doesn't shoot it well, facilitates extremely well for playing in a pro league. So he's an excellent facilitator. Some other guards, though, LeBaron Philon, when he played head-to-head against Fears, his intensity, he was way more intense and way more physical than Fears. So I actually like Philon over Fears right now. A lot of people don't. But my guy, they don't even have to luck out and get that 11 to 10 or 11 to 15. Because Boogie Flan broke his hand for Arkansas, and he is dynamite, man. You talk about the quickest hands in the class. He is a thief. So point of attack defense, he plays good defense, moves his feet. He takes a guy right in the center of his chest, doesn't shy away from that. He's a tough shot maker. He can facilitate. He can rebound. He has good size. So you talk about a guy that could fall down draft boards. So even if Jimmy Butler elevates Golden State to a status where their pick is in the 20s, I think Boogie Flan could be there. And even though he's only 6'3", I think he would be a really great fit in that backcourt with Tyler Hero and those guys.
Matt, is there anybody that's jumped out to you in that space?
I think, well, Flan has been one of my guys ever since like the seasons kind of began. I mean, a couple other ones that this guy isn't like a natural point guard, but he's been a good facilitator this year is like Cam Jones from Marquette. Like he's taken the majority of the ball handling responsibilities since Skolnick graduated.
Another Marquette guy?
Yeah, another Marquette guy.
Okay.
Like he's not a natural point guard by any means, but he can be like a secondary creator in a good offense, I think, at the NBA level. He is going to be an older prospect, though. He will be 23 years old, and he is, I think, a fifth-year senior. And so he is like an older, like, you know, how the Heat went with like Jaime Jaquez a couple of years ago. They went with that, you know, older, like we know what we're going to get out of you right away. And not necessarily too much upside, but Boogie has been one of my guys throughout the pre-draft process of someone that I like a lot. And to Adel's point, I do think he will fall down some draft boards. There's obviously questions with Fears. I do like Philon just because like he does a little bit of everything for you. Like he's a really good rebounding guard for someone of his position. He's a good facilitator. He's very good in the pick and roll. Like he plays a lot stronger than he is. Like he'll keep dudes on his hip. He's a good decision maker in those situations. And that's something where it's like, if you have Bam and you have Ware and you're initiating pick and roll above the break, he can be someone who would be a really good like facilitator and decision maker with extra, you know, spacing around him. So those are just a couple of things on a couple of those guys. But someone I want to mention was Cam Jones, just because of like the Marquette connection. Even though he will be older, I know some people may not want to hear that, but he's just someone to keep an eye on mid to late first round.
No, it's a good point that Matt makes though about the idea of a guy being older, because we've seen the Heat go a couple of different directions here where, Jovic was more of a project. Jaquez more ready to play right away because he'd been a 4-year college player at a big time program, and then Ware, kind of being in between, player who transferred, younger player, but maybe not quite as raw as Jovic in some ways. As you look at the current roster construction that the Heat have, would you think that they would, let's say they have one pick in the first round, not two, Adel. Would you think they'd be more inclined to go with the younger player or the more veteran, veteran prospect?
So whenever I saw this trade take place, all of the trades and how this all shook out, the one thing that really stood out to me is they've positioned themselves really well to go in multiple different ways on whoever's on the board. You could go with that lead guard like Boogie Flan. Flan gives you a little extra shooting. Or if you do want to go a backup big, this is the one thing that I really wanted to point out earlier, is there are going to be a lot of backup bigs that are like starter level capable around that 11th pick. So say you do get the best case scenario and you luck out and get that 11th pick. There's like an Asa Newell. There's like a Derek Queen, for example, Thomas Sorber from Georgetown, legit 7-footer, strong as an ox. His hands are strongest hands I've seen in a long time for a big. And then there's guys like that out there. So they could go in a multitude of different ways. So I don't think you can just say, are they going to go with the older guy or are they going to go with the younger guy? I think they're going to go with the best fit to contribute right away. It's not necessarily going to be the older guy because these young guys are so talented. Like, you could take a Thomas Sorber and he could be your backup big from day one and contribute from day one. He's a good facilitator, great rebounder. Like I said, he's strong as an ox for somebody that's 18. I don't understand how that guy's that strong at that young of age. But there's also guys like Rasheer Fleming later in the draft. He's going to be a wing guy. He's a forward in college, but he's going to translate in the NBA as a wing. He shoots like 40% from three. He has good size. He's like 6'8", 6'9", long wingspan, gets into passing lanes. So there's going to be guys that are there, and I don't think age is going to dictate which way they go, in my opinion.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about – I'm going to get you guys' opinions about whether they should keep picks in this draft. Like, in other words, is it worth keeping these picks or kind of where they are, maybe dealing – and, of course, the Stepien rule and all that stuff is things we've talked about in the past. But I'm just curious where you think the value is here for keeping someone at the level they're at this build. We don't typically do the same spot twice, but we want to tell you about Prize Picks because, again, the big game coming up. So use the code 5, FIVE, put down $5. You get $50 to play. You can download Prize Picks from the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, or prizepicks.com. And as we mentioned, our friends over at Big Picks Energy are partnered with us on this. Use the code 5 there, get their plays. But in this particular contest, you got to be subscribed to both them and us, and we're going to give you an additional $59 in promo funds if you have the best card for Sunday's games. Check it out, prizepicks.com. And yes, of course, you can play the NBA. If you're listening to this before Jimmy Butler's first game with the Golden State Warriors, just checked it, 19.5 points is his number today. So you can play Jimmy over or under. If he found his joy again, then maybe you might want to play him over. So go to prizepicks.com, use the code FIVE, get $50 to play right away and enter our contest. So, Matt, as you look at the Heat where they are now, would you be is this draft strong enough that they should be focusing on this draft or focusing on maybe moving this pick if they can expedite the process with some of the other players they have on the roster?
I think this draft is absolutely strong enough to keep picks and have that talent on your roster, like especially in this new CBA. We've talked about this ad nauseum, Adel, and I'm sure you guys have as well. Players on cost-controlled contracts are at a premium in today's NBA with the second apron and in this new CBA. And the Heat, depending on where they're at in the middle of the first round, like that's a very cost-controlled contract that they will have on their books. And if you make a big trade for a certain player or whatever the case is, like how much would that elevate your ceiling as opposed to stacking the deck with some of these young players? And guess what? The Heat are the best developmental system in the NBA. And so it's like, I think it's even more valuable for them to keep these picks or pick whatever what best case scenarios picks, but at least keep one pick in the 2025 NBA draft, or if it conveys to 2026, keep it there. And so you're able to have, the bites at the apple, and then have, Spoelstra, all the coaching staff, the developmental team develop these guys. And then you see where you're at with them. And then you kind of parlay that into something bigger if you want to, or if they're good enough or they fit well enough. Like, cost controlled contracts in today's NBA are at a premium, because it's going to be very hard for teams to build, championship level teams unless you're the Boston Celtics and you get ahead of the curve on this with more than just two max players. And, with Tyler and with Bam on the books, I think it's, even though we could sit here and argue all day whether they're, 1A guys on a championship team or whatever, 1B guys or whatever, but like, having players on cost controlled contracts is very valuable. And you already see it with Khalil Ware and how well he's developed early in this season. You've seen it with Jovic, who he's going to be up for an extension this upcoming offseason. Like, well, that's something that they have to figure out. We haven't necessarily seen it with Jaime in his second year for a couple different reasons, but like, he's still someone who could potentially blossom while being on a rookie contract, whether it's next year or the year after that. Like, we've seen it already with some of these guys, and like, they've invested in Tyler Hero. They've invested in Bam Adebayo, even though, team or fans have traded those guys multiple different times over their rookie contracts. And now that they, get, whether it's a max contract or close to a max contract or whatever the case is, like, and, the organization's proven to be right. And so I think, investing in these picks, especially in today's economy, I think is more beneficial for them and more valuable for them, especially since they're the best developmental organization in the NBA.
Well, I can tell you they agree with you on this part of it, because I know that Andy Ellisberg, in his negotiations with Golden State, insisted on the pick structure the way that it was ultimately given. Whereas I heard that Golden State wanted to give them other picks, like, for instance, the Cleveland pick, etc. Miami insisted on this particular pick, and they actually got pretty lenient protections on it. If you look at it, just top 10 protected for 2 years, then it becomes unprotected in 27. Although, again, it's more likely with the fact that, unless things totally bomb out in Golden State, which is possible, but it's more likely with the way that they're going, where they're trying to win now with Curry and Butler, that probably you're going to end up using that pick in 25 or 26 as opposed to being unprotected in 27. All right, before we close here, Adel, I'm going to let both of you guys do this, all right? Because I know that a lot of Heat fans are not invested in college basketball. This tends to be, I know this hurts your heart, guys, but this tends to be one of the worst college basketball TV markets in the country. And that's the case, even though it typically finishes like 49th out of 50th in major markets. And that's even with Miami and FAU making the same Final Four a couple of years ago, that it's been hard to kind of get people to invest in it the way they invest in the Heat. So let's do this. Okay. For players who would fit the Heat, and I know you've mentioned a couple of them already, but each of you guys just give us quickly 3 that everybody should be watching college basketball this year. Because I know even Eric Spoelstra doesn't pay any attention to this until the Heat are done, or at least on his breaks, and he'll end up watching the stuff after the fact. But he catches a little bit of the tournament, but not much. Give us 3 each that you both like. Adel.
So I'm going to cheat a little bit and pretend we are trading the 2 picks, and we can trade into the top 5 or 6.
Okay.
And so one of those guys that we definitely would want you to watch would be VJ Edgecombe of Baylor. Just an outstanding freak athlete, getting better at his 3-point shot. Also, Con Knipple from Duke. He's a knockdown 3-point shooter, just a rock defensively. Needs to get a little bit better with his foot speed, but he's a great secondary creator. Beats the close consistently for his foot speed, lack of foot speed, which is just speaks to his basketball intelligence. And then I can't say Boogie Flan because he's hurt. So I'll pick one other player that's smaller school. I mentioned him once before, but be on the lookout for Rasheer Fleming from St. Joseph. He's 6'9", 240 pounds. He's averaging 15 points per game, 5 assists per game. That's Boogie Flan, sorry. 15 points per game, 9 rebounds per game, and he shoots 40% from 3. So Rasheer Fleming, St. Joe's, is a good later round draft pick.
Matt?
I'm not gonna cheat, but one guy Adele and I have loved a lot. Who you look at different mock, different big boards, and he's around like the 7 to 10 range. And so, if he's in that range, or if he somehow falls out of that range, Trey Johnson from Texas is someone that Adele and I love, even though, I think the criticism with him is his lack of productivity, in the rebounding department, assist department. I think he's better at both of those things than he gets credit for, especially defensively as well. But he's an absolute bucket. I believe he still leads the SEC in scoring despite only being 18 years old. And the SEC, for anyone who's curious, is the toughest conference in the country right now. And so he's someone I would definitely look out for if the Heat fall in that kind of like 11, 12, 13 range. If he falls out of that top 10, I'll mention Sorber again, because Sorber's a guy that wasn't really on many people's draft radars at the beginning of the season, just with how he's played in Big East play with Georgetown, how he's kind of turned that ship around. He's phenomenal. Like he's, as Del mentioned earlier, 6'11", 7 foot, excellent hands, has good touch in between 10 to 15 feet, excellent footwork in the low post. He'll direct traffic if he's in the high post or above the break. His verticality defensively, his coordination, his hands, just excellent. I won't mention Boogie Fland. I'm trying to find a third guy that I want to. I'll say I know Adele's not a huge fan of this guy. The more I watch him, the more I come around with him a little bit. He could be like a Duncan Robinson-ish replacement, kind of the same mold. But Lee McNeely, out of UConn, good rebounder for his position. They've put the ball in his hands a little bit more. He returned last night. He missed 8 games with an ankle sprain, and so he's now finally playing again. He got better as the game went on last night. They played St. John's, who's been one of the best defensive teams in the entire country. And so he's someone that I mentioned, 6'9", 6'10", good shooter. Something that I've talked about in the past with the Heat and their scouting department is I feel like they target guys who are well coached in college. And Lee McNeely plays under Dan Hurley, who, back-to-back national champion, one of the best, if not the best coach in America. And that's something they did, with Khalil Ware, Mike Woodson. I know Mike Woodson, former NBA coach. I know his Indiana tenure has been a little bit of a disaster. He's retiring at the end of the year. Jaime Jaquez with Mick Cronin. He was a Mick Cronin ever since Mick Cronin was there. With Bam and Tyler with the Calipari connection. So it's like, if I'm looking at someone who's like well coached and someone who's they have the championship expectation at UConn. I know Dan coaches players up that way. And so that's something that once I think the Heat look at, and I think they like. I can't say that for certain, but just based on recent history tells us that is the case. And so he's someone that I would now that he's finally playing again, now that he's finally healthy, someone who I would look at as the season winds down.
All right, so a few to bookmark here. I can't believe how far we've come, because in the old days, basically I felt like the Heat were drafting whoever, Pat looked at a list, just scratched somebody down and said, okay, well, Tim James plays at Miami. And so we'll give him a shot. Wayne Simeon, I've heard of him, and a lot of those picks didn't work out. Obviously, their scouting and development has come a long way. And look, Chet Kammer is still involved in the process in a big way. Somebody that Riley and the Heat trust, and Adam Simon you can argue is as good as his job right now as anybody in the Heat organization, and they got a couple obviously that do pretty well at what they do as well. So we'll see where this goes. We'll be following the draft, and who knows, the Heat might have 2 picks, although I know that's not necessarily what Heat fans would want, because that means that things have spiraled out of the play-in here and they don't end up qualifying for the playoffs. But the prospect of 2 picks, we'll be giving you draft episodes 12 times a day. Thanks to Adel. Follow him at Digital Adel. Our guy Matt Hanifan, MPH_824_. Catch him on playback as well as on the Force Pod too. Have a good day, everybody.
See you.